Hello and welcome back to Over the Hill Outdoors. One night on this year's all-ice winter walkabout, I practiced some of my primitive pathfinder skills, specifically that of direction finding and distance estimation, by going on a hike in the pitch black dark out there in the middle of this big frozen snow-covered featureless mountain lake. The sky was clear, but there was no moon, and there were no man-made lights visible in the distance in any direction that I could use as points of reference. My goal was simply to reach a couple of predetermined points along about a half-mile route, and using only the stars for determining direction, and then my pace count for estimating the distance traveled. My first point was 2/10 of a mile, approximately northeast of camp. The second, a couple hundred yards northwest of there, and the last point was my camp, about another 2/10 of a mile southwest of point number 2. The snow surface was undisturbed, and I only used my headlamp to light the snow, maybe a few yards out in front of me, just to make sure that I didn't run into one of those open spring holes. But otherwise it was just pitch black dark. I'll show you now how it went, and then I'll talk some at the end of the video about the actual techniques I used.
It's about 8:30 at night, pitch black. The sky is clear so you can see the stars. Right now I got the camera pointed at the North Star, and I'm going to drop the camera angle down to the snow level and show you what's right in front of me. There it is. That's what I drew this afternoon when the sun was out, using the shadow method. You can see it's right on, within maybe 1 or 2 degrees, maybe even less. Alright, I've reached the point that I think is 2/10 of a mile northeast of my camp. I compare where I am currently standing with where the GPS says I should be, and I am, according to the GPS, exactly 2/10 of a mile from camp, and I'm about 20 feet to the left of where I should be. So, not too bad. Now I'm going to turn around and go back, except I'm going to move off to one side several hundred yards and then try to estimate where camp is directionally. Alright, I've walked west some distance, and I think I'm now approximately 2/10 of a mile away from camp, and I think camp is in a southwesterly direction. It's kind of an eerie feeling to be out here in the middle of nowhere and not be able to see camp, not be able to see any landmarks, any features around me, just pitch black. I think I know which way camp is. I guess I could always come back and follow my tracks back, but anyway, to make it more challenging, I'm going to go and see if I can just do it cross country. So I used the North Star, made my directional arrows here. So that way is south, and that way is north, that way is west. You can see halfway between south and west would be southwest, and I'm guessing southwest is the direction I should go, so it's in the direction of that line that has an arrowhead on the end of it. So I've drawn that, and then I've looked up in the sky and I found a star that's in that direction, And that's the way that I'm going to head. You can't see it, but there is a star out there. So I need to go in that direction 2/10 of a mile, and then hopefully I'll be able to see camp from that point. Alright, so I'm ready to begin. I'll go in the direction of that arrow, about 2/10 of a mile. There's 2 beads on my distance counter, and hopefully I'll be able to see camp from that point. Alright, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's important to look back from the direction you came and look at your tracks to see if they're going in a straight line or if they're veering to the right or to the left. I find tonight anyway I have a tendency to veer to the left, and I have to keep correcting myself. I look at the stars and try to redirect myself. Pretty straight, but again there's veering slightly to my left as I'm walking along. Alright, here I am. I've gone what I thought to be 2/10 of a mile in a south-southwesterly direction. Stopped right here, looking around for camp, and look at that. It's about as close as you can get. I did get right on. I don't profess to be that good all the time, but tonight it was right on.
So there you have it. After walking over a half mile alone out there on the trackless snow-covered ice and in complete darkness and no physical reference points, I ended up within just a few feet of my intended destination. And I don't always hit it that close, but I've done it often enough to be pretty comfortable with the reliability of the techniques involved. There are plenty of YouTube videos out there on the techniques I use, so I won't take time to describe them in any amount of detail, but I've already described in an earlier video or two how I determine directions without a compass or a GPS, so please take a look at them if you're interested. I estimate distance using 2 basic methods. The first is timed travel and the second is pace counting. Timed travel is less accurate, but I use it when wanting just a ballpark estimate of the distance I've covered. I've done enough hiking in various conditions and types of terrain to know approximately how far I can travel in an hour. On relatively flat ground with a good trail and a light backpack, say on a half-day hike, I'll average just over 3 miles an hour, and that includes my normal breaks. I know just by looking at my watch then that I've traveled approximately a half a mile if I've been walking for 10 minutes, and 20 minutes means I've gone a mile. In 30 minutes I will have covered a mile and a half, and in 60 minutes I will have gone about 3 miles. If the terrain is hilly and I have a heavier backpack and maybe there's no defined trail and or it's an all-day hike and I'm a little more tired toward the end, I'll average closer to 2.5 miles per hour, and again that includes normal breaks. Under those conditions I'm covering about 1 mile every 25 minutes. If it's really rugged terrain, or if I have a full backpack and there's some bushwhacking involved, maybe a lot, and it's a long hike, I may do well to average just 2 miles an hour. So every 15 minutes is a half mile and every 30 minutes is a mile. Now if it's really rugged, nearly all uphill or deep snow or bad snow conditions like I was experiencing on this walkabout, and or I'm carrying a heavy load, I may average no more than 1 mile per hour. And as I mentioned, those were the conditions on this walkabout, and I was pretty close to 1 mile an hour as I checked myself. The second method of travel distance estimation I use is pace counting. It tends to be more reliable than timed travel, but it still can vary considerably depending on terrain. There's nothing complicated about it, and it doesn't require any special equipment. It involves simply counting your steps or paces and knowing from previous experience and practice approximately how many steps or paces it takes for you to cover a specific distance, say a mile, in various conditions and or types of terrain. Keeping track of how many steps or paces you've taken can be done in a variety of ways. Some just keep track in their head. Some will use objects to represent a certain number of steps or paces to keep them from losing count, such as putting a small pebble in your pocket every time you take 100 paces. Others use what are called ranger beads, which are just a fancier way of keeping a running count of your steps or paces. I know from lots of experimenting and observation that on relatively flat terrain, when I'm hiking long distances at a comfortable and sustainable speed, I'll average slightly over 2.5 feet per step or stride, which is just over 5 feet per pace. Actually, I'm pretty close to about 5.2 feet from lots and lots of trial and error. But in other words, every time I put down my right foot, I've traveled slightly over 5 feet. That means every time I've taken 100 paces, I've gone a little over 500 feet, or about 1/10 of a mile. And once I've covered 1,000 paces, I've traveled a little more than 5,000 feet, or pretty close to a mile. Actually, for me, it turns out to be 5,200 feet, which is really close to a mile. Modern day cell phone technology makes the calculation of your pace very simple. Just about any fitness app keeps track of the number of steps you take, and then it computes the total distance traveled. If you want to know what your pace is, then you simply divide your distance traveled in feet by the number of steps taken, and then you multiply it by 2 to convert from the length of your step to the length of a pace. Determining distance traveled on foot is easy, and it's very accurate if you're using a GPS device. But batteries can die and electronics can fail, so don't bet your life on it. Make sure that you know and practice these primitive Pathfinder navigation skills both in daylight and at night, so that you'll have a reliable backup when needed. Be safe and enjoy the outdoors.